Okay, in five, four, three, two, one.
Hello, my name is Curtis Merriweather. And first of all, I just want to thank you for taking time out your busy schedule and making this investment in your government contracting journey. There are a lot of gurus out there, and I'm glad you took the opportunity to select my course. Now, before we jump into the content, I just want to provide a little bit of context on who I am and why I'm qualified to have this
Sorry, stop,
conversation.
stop, stop.
Okay,
I need you to look at the camera, not the screen.
at the camera. Okay,
Thank
okay,
you. All right.
all right.
In five, four, three, two, one.
Welcome. My name is Curtis Merriweather. I'm thankful that you took time to make this investment in this course. Now, before I jump into the content of this course, I want to talk a little bit about who I am and why I'm qualified to have this conversation that we're going to begin today. I have been in government contracting since I was 17. Have not worked in fast food like many of the high school students. My very first job was a contractor for the Department of Defense, specifically Bechtel and Westinghouse. Throughout my college tenure, I used government contracting to put myself through school. Now, I was not an owner at that time. I was an employee. In 2010, I actually left Department of Energy and I pursued my own government contracting firm. Now, what I intend to do in this course is to show you the tools, the tips, the strategies, and the action steps that I used more than a decade ago to launch a multi-million dollar government contracting firm. And the old adage is true. Success leaves clues. So what I want you to do is you travel along this journey with me. I want you to get a notepad, pen, paper, and I want you to uh, catalog the information I'm going to present to you in this course. The same principles that I used, I still use today. And my goal is to hopefully streamline that process. If you've been around or seen any of the contracting gurus, there's a lot of terms and nomenclature. My job is to demystify the process and give you some actionable steps so you too can find success in government contracting. I made my first $1 million at 31 years of age over a decade ago using the same principles and tips that I'm going to share with you in this journey. Now, before we jump in, let's go ahead and let's kind of outline on our next screen. Let's outline what are the goals and purposes of this particular module. Now, on your screen, you're going to see what we intend for you to learn in this course. My job is to help you understand the basics and provide you with some tools that are going to help you navigate the contracting journey. Number two, I'm going to teach you the government marketing fundamentals. You know, when we actually do government contracting, the marketing looks very differently than it would look in B2B, excuse me, B2C, business to consumer. Now, I'm gonna throw up some buzzwords and I'm gonna try to do a very good job of trying to explain what some of those buzzwords mean. When I say B2C, I'm talking business to consumer. So think about your retail brands that are actually selling to individuals. That's not what we're doing here, but I just want to provide context. And then you have B2B, business to business. So you have businesses selling to other businesses. Now, what we're going to do here in this course, we're going to do a combination of B2B, business to business, and B2G, business to government. The marketing strategies for B2B and B2G are very similar, business to business, business to government. We do not use B2C marketing strategies here because of who our target customers are. The third thing we're going to talk very briefly, not in this particular session, but in future sessions, we're going to talk about the bid and proposal process. Now, I'm going to give you my own personal advice on how to better navigate this without spending time looking at extensive RFP proposal bids, but how to actually identify work. And then the goal here of all of this is to us to be able to participate in the government marketplace. So that is what we're going to learn throughout this course. And at the end, I'm going to show you a framework. You're going to pick up a framework along the way that you can repeat over and over and over again. Now, as we transition into our next screen, and on your screen right now, you see this is an older budget, but I chose this particular budget because of how well the information was laid out. The federal government operates on a fiscal year. This is very different than a calendar year. So when we go to our calendars, we think about calendar years, January to December. The federal government doesn't operate on a calendar year. They operate on a fiscal year. Every October 1st through September 30th is the fiscal year. For example, the day of this recording, we're in 2022. We just left calendar year. We just left the 2022 fiscal year, and we've already entered into the 2023 fiscal year. The government kind of operates on a forward basis. So October 1 of 2022 began fiscal year 2023. This is very important. It's very important because when you understand how the federal government allocates their budget, it's going to make a lot more sense as we talk into some of the future modules about how the funding stream works in the federal marketplace. Okay, so every company has seasons. Okay, there's a season in government contract. Remember, I told you October 1 through September 30th. So we are now in 2022. So October 1st of 2022 until September 30th of 2023 is FY23. October 1 of 2023 will push you into FY 2024, and that will run until September of the following year. Now, with the screen you have up, the federal government operates with a discretionary budget and a mandatory budget. Now, these are historical numbers. And I chose this specifically because this ignores things like COVID. COVID did some very interesting things in the contracting landscape, money-wise, but I wanted to kind of show you what a typical fiscal year would look like. So I went and chose from the 2019 fiscal year. Now, this 2019 budget, remember, October 1 of 2018, we're looking at historical numbers here, just for an example. So October 1st, 2018 pushed us into FY 2019. And this year ended, this fiscal year, in the example that's on your screen, this fiscal year ended on September 30th, 2020. Remember, 2018. So remember, started in October 1, 2018, and ran until September 30th, 2019. That was our FY 2019. Same example I showed you earlier. Remember, the government moves forward a year ahead of the calendar year. So we're in calendar year 22. When their October 1 started, we moved into FY 23. So it always operates forward, it's forward looking. Okay, now, when we look at our 2019 discretionary budget, and we're not going to talk about mandatory, just recognize for the sake of our conversation, you have a mandatory budget and you have a discretionary budget. The discretionary budget is where our contracting dollars come from. And you're in a government contracting course, so we're most interested in the discretionary budget. Now, military spending has historically been where most of the money lies in government contracting. So we talk about military spending, we're talking about contracting opportunities with the Army, Navy, Coast Guard, Air Force. That's what we're talking about historically. You can even throw the National Guard in there. The contracting dollars have been there, whether we're talking Lockheed Martin with ships and military armaments like Tomahawk missiles, things like that is what comes out of the military budget. And historically, it has been the largest single item in the budget. And they have, so we call that military or DOD spending. All of your Department of Defense stuff comes out of that. Then you have what we call federal civilian. These are your non-classified contracts. Now, when we look at our military spending, a lot of your classified work, whether it's secret clearances. And if you don't know what this is, that's fine. But I have some people who do know. You with your secret clearances, your top secret clearances, your top secret SCI, your special access programs, your black programs are typically, not all, but a large consolidation of that money. Those classified programs are in that budget stream. Not the only one, because there's some stuff in state, but most of your classified work is there. So there's some special things that your company has to do to be able to do that kind of work. But we'll just leave that there for now. The rest of the pie that we have on the screen would be federal civilian. These are non-DOD, typically may not have a clearance, or clearance may not be very high. These are your confidential access, a very basic background. So give you some examples. You got food and agriculture, so USDA. You got unemployment and labor, so we're talking about Department of Labor. You got science, which could be things like National Science Foundation and other. You got energy and environment, so that's probably your DOE. Now, I'm just giving high-level generalities, of course. You got diplomacy and foreign aid. This might be your USAID, United States, the assistance area. You got transport, DOT. You have health. You got health and human services and their different sub-agencies. So you got health and human services. You got the Centers for Medicaid, Medicare Services, CMS, CDC. Those are the things you can think about from a health perspective. You got housing and community. Think about HUD, Housing Urban Division. You got education, Department of Energy. You got government, very broad category. This could be things like the Smithsonian, which is kind of quasi-government, and some of those other obscure, like the Medical Disabilities Board may be in there. And you got the veteran benefits or the VA. So this kind of gives you a little bit of a high-level perspective of the different kind of activities that are being funded. And this information came from the Office of Management and Budget. The Office of Management and Budget is the office that determines or keeps a record of how much money the government spends. There's a whole process that goes into this, but for the sake of that conversation, we'll kind of table this, but know that every budget has to be approved by Congress. And this typically happens fourth year calendar year, not fiscal year. Fourth year calendar year, first quarter fiscal year, you'll start seeing budget negotiations happening. Typically, first quarter calendar year, second quarter fiscal year, same time period, we'll start seeing the budget starting to make its rounds and actually landing to these agencies. Because remember, the federal government operates on a fiscal year, not on a calendar year. It does take a little bit of some time to kind of get your arms around that. Now, so this kind of gives an idea. Now, this is what I want to talk about now, because this is the question that always comes up without fail. What type of small business might you be? By default, all of us start off as small businesses. Even if you look at Walmart, Walmart is a huge conglomerate. They started out as a small business. Amazon, at one point, if you see the old pictures of Jeff Bezos, started out as a small business. We all, by default, start out as small businesses. That is a social-economic designation by itself. Small business could be total small business based on different size standards that we'll talk about when we get to the next codes. But here are the major ones. You have the 8A. You have this one called 8M, which is starting to get some traction. It's the economically disadvantaged woman-owned small business. Also may be referred to as the EDWOSB. And there was a little bit of push a few years ago, maybe about 5-6 years ago, to make the 8M program. But when I lump all these together, you're going to see the woman-owned small business. Now, all of these programs, with one exception, are ran and administered by the SBA, the Small Business Administration. Then you have the Hub Zone. These Hub Zone companies are companies that operate in economically depressed areas. When the census comes out every so many years and they go into a survey, they redraw the lines of where the economically depressed areas are. So if your company is located in one of these economically depressed areas. Well, also now some policy came out a few years back under the last administration where they had these opportunity zones. The opportunity zones typically coincide with the hub zones or the economically depressed zones. And the reason why they provide this provision is because they want to stimulate economic growth in these areas. Now, as a hub zone company, you have to A, be located in a hub zone, and B, you have to employ a certain percentage of your workforce in the hub zone. And there's some ways you can do that. You can either A, hire people part-time in those areas to work in the company, and there's certain percentages that have to be maintained to maintain that status. It's one of the harder, my opinion, one of the harder certifications to obtain and maintain because of the employee count provisions, which are not found in the other social economic categories that we're kind of covering. We got the woman owned small business, WSB. Now, the reason why I set them aside, there's third party agencies that also have done the EDWOSB, the economically advantaged woman-owned small business. There is a push to consolidate that, and that is in works. But then you have the woman-owned small business, which is a 8A, SBA ran program. Then you have the SDVOSB. This is a service disabled veteran-owned small businesses. This program is the one exception. It is ran by the Department of Veteran Affairs. Now, there are some policy changes that are being floated around. They have not went into effect yet, where there's some talk about the SBA running all of the social economic programs. But as of today, that's not the case. But I do want you to know that there is some policy discussions ongoing about the SDVOSB program coming under the control of the SBA. That has not happened as of the time of this recording. So as of today, the SDVOSB program is still ran by Department of Veteran Affairs. Now, we'll talk about it briefly because I may have some service-disabled veterans watching. If you have a disability, certified disability by the federal government, once you have your disability paperwork, you can go in and you can get, and this can actually be proved and confirmed by Veteran Affairs. You start a company, your company go in support with the veteran, with the VA. Your company can be classified as a service disabled veteran owned small business. Now, for all of the ones I just mentioned, 8A, 8M, or economically disadvantaged woman-owned small business, Hub Zone woman-owned small business, SDVOSB, the owner who qualifies has to have 51% ownership. So if I have multiple business partners, say it's two of us or three of us, whatever the number, the majority owner has to have 51% ownership. So let me give you an example. The 8A program is typically for minorities. So if you are a African American female and you have a non-minority business partner, in order for you to qualify for the 8A designation or the woman-owned small business designation, because you could actually apply for more than, you can have more than one of these designations, or the Hub Zone, that African American female, she's the woman and the minority, she has to have 51% ownership. So you can have two or more business partners, or you could be 100% owned by one individual. But if you're going to have partners, the applicant of the program, 8A, 8M, Hub Zone, woman-owned small business, SDOVSB, has to have 51% ownership, and then the rest of the partners can divvy up the 49% as you see fit. Small business designation, there's nothing that you have to do to maintain that status other than just be a small business. And then we have SDB. This is a small disadvantaged business. Typically, these firms are firms that have graduated from the 8A program. Now, let me say that's why we're here. The 8A program is a 9-year engagement, and it's very paperwork intensive. And the reason for the paperwork intensity is because the SBA is co-signing on your contracts. It's the easiest way to simplify this. In the event that an 8A firm defaults, the SBA will step in and make that agency whole if it is in fact an 8A contract. So when an 8A contract is awarded and you're a prime, we'll get into prime SERPs later. Prime, just because I mentioned it, a prime is the one who gets the check from the federal government. You have a direct relationship with the federal government. Subs or subcontractors have an indirect relationship with the federal government. We're talking about government contractors. That's why I'm talking government. The sub has an indirect relationship. So there's typically an intermediary in between that subcontractor and the government agency. So when the invoices are paid, if the invoice from the federal agency you're supporting does not have your name on it, you're a subcontractor. If you have a direct relationship with the federal staff and you are submitting the invoices directly to the federal government, you are a prime. So to make this simple, because some people have not heard that term prime versus sub. The prime is the one who has the direct contractual relationship with the federal government. A subcontractor has an intermediate relationship. There's a person in between you and the federal government. So the federal government has a contractual relationship with large business A, and you may be supporting large business A in providing goods and services in support of a federal opportunity. So prime, direct relationship to the federal government; subcontractor, indirect relationship to the federal government. You're still on a government contract, but you are not responsible. The prime is ultimately responsible. Anything good or bad that happens on that contract, the government either credits or penalizes the prime directly. The subcontractor still should be doing a good job, but their punishment or appreciation will come from the prime contractor. All of the subcontractors support the prime contractor to provide goods and services. Now, I've already thrown a lot at you guys already, but I know you guys are a smart audience and you're keeping up. Now, let's get ready to look at the registration process just briefly. Again, as I mentioned, at certified.sba.gov. And you notice on this screen, I do not have the SDVOSB. Now, you'll hear me throw these acronyms out. I apologize. I've been doing this quite a while, so sometimes the acronyms roll up. But I'm going to try to make a mental note that every time I throw out an acronym to explain what it means. But SDVOSB, which is not on the screen, is the Service Disabled Veteran Owned Small Business Certification, which, as we talked about a few moments ago, that program is actually ran by the Veteran Affairs or Department of Veteran Affairs. Okay, but the 8A, the Hub Zone, the SDB, which is typically graduated 8As. You don't, if you graduate from the 8A program and you fall within the labor employee count and the dollar threshold, you don't have to do anything further. You get that status by default. Then you have the WOSB. And then, of course, we're all small business. Small businesses do not require any certification whatsoever. But the way you register for these services, it's going to go to be certified.sba.gov. You can see the screenshot of the website. Here you can go and you can look at the eligibility benefits, and it'll give you more specific questions. But I wanted you to know, For those who may be further along and say, hey, I've been doing this for a little while, I want to certify, this is the website you would go to at certify.sba.gov, and you'll have a bunch of information there. I would encourage you to get in contact with your local small business agency representative. Every state has one. You'll be able to find that information if you navigate on that site as well to figure out where your office is, and they may have some points of contact. Okay, so here's the SDVOSB. As we can see, this is through Department of Veteran Affairs, and there's their website. There's the URL on the screen. If within your course, there'll be some links, of course, attached as well, so you can actually have hyperlinks for how to actually navigate to this information. So you can either copy it down, or you'll be able to find a module in the system that'll help you navigate to these better. All righty. Now, this is where it all starts. So you want to be a government contractor. Well, the very first thing you have to do, we all have to do, is you have to register your business. And the way you register your business is through a system called SAM. SAM is the mnemonic, the abbreviation for Systems for Award Management. SAM is the system that the federal government has put in place to manage and maintain its list of active contractors. Now, what SAM really is a payment management system. So if you're a prime contractor, the information that's in your SAM profile is how the federal government will pay you. No one's going to call you and say, hey, we're trying to figure out what your payment details are so we can pay you. So it's very important. I'm going to say this here. It's very important that when you are a government contractor, and I'm talking prime, because this does not apply when you're a sub, even though whether you're a sub or a prime contractor, anyone who's doing business with the federal government has to register in SAM. That's the rule. But if you're a prime contractor, especially, it is super important that you keep your payment details up to date in SAM. What SAM does, and we're going to talk about how to register in a minute, but I have to say this because it's so important. What the federal government does is once you submitted your invoice, if you have a contract, they tell you how to submit payments or submit invoices for payment. When it's time to make the payment, they're electronic. The federal government's not sending you checks, they're electronic. There's typically an ACH, typically 1 to 2 business days, for that money to go from the customer or for the government site to your bank account. If your payment details in your SAM account are not correct, you're not going to get paid. And you're going to create unnecessary burden trying to recoup funds because the money was sent to the right place. So it is super, super important that you make sure your payment details in SAM are correct. Now that I'm here, so I think we've talked about the importance of SAM and why, especially for my primes, why this information needs to be current. Now, there's four things that you're going to need in order to create a SAM account. Now, this is the screen. You can see it. You're going to want to create a profile from this page, and you're going to need, number one, the name of a company. I recommend an LLC or an S corporation. Now, you throw my disclaimer out here. Anytime we talk about corporate formation, I always want you to advise your accountants and your attorneys to get the best business advice for your particular situation. Always consult the professionals. I am simply providing rules of thumb and things that I have done in the past that have worked for me. But these are your business. This is your business. I want you to be accountable and get the advice you need to make sure that you set these things up properly. It's easy to create, but we don't want to be doing rework because we have not set them up correctly with the proper legal advice. But there's going to be four things you need. Number one, you're going to need a company, a name of a company. Um, I recommend LLCs or S corporations, and talk to your tax professionals and your accountants about which method is best for you. The second thing you're going to need is going to be a tax ID number. We all have social security numbers in the United States if we're legal citizens in this country. It's a requirement. Analogous to your social security number is a tax ID number. That is a social security number for a business. So we as individuals have individual social security numbers. Our organizations also, you talk to the purists, they'll say that organization or a business is an entity, it's a person. They have tax ID numbers. So first was my business name. Second is my tax ID. Third thing you're going to need is going to be a DUNS number. This is probably the one thing you probably have not heard of. A DUNS number is a number that does credit monitoring for the business. I'm making it way oversimplified, but just to make this where it's not overly complicated. So you're going to need a DUNS number, DUNS. The company who does this is a company called Duns and Bradstreet. And they have a division that does these federal entity numbers. So you need a DUNS number. It's number 3. So let me just recap again. Name of a company. Number 2, your tax ID number. Number 3 is your DUNS number. And the fourth and final thing you're going to need is going to be the banking account information. That is how you're going to get paid. Your banking account information. Those are the 4 things that are necessary to get through the SAM registration process. The SAM registration process. Here we go. So here they are here. In addition to your tax identification number, those are the things I talked about. Remember, you got a social security as individuals. Our businesses have tax ID numbers, okay? You're going to also need a NAICS code, NAICS code. You can also do a PSC code or an FSC code. I'm going to talk about these in detail. So I know I'm throwing some acronyms out, but you have to get your arms around this. The NAICS, the North American Industrial Classification System. In your SAM profile, they're going to ask you what your NAICS codes are. These are your industry classification numbers. So we look every year and we see, GDP growth, GDP being an economic term, gross domestic product, went up, or GDP growth went down. One of the ways, not the only way, but one of the ways that they track this information is through the NAICS code. When you create certain bank accounts, the bank account, sometimes whether go down to Wells Fargo or Bank of America, whoever your preferred banking institution is, if you're starting a business account, not your personal account, if you're starting a business account, they may ask you, what is your NAICS code? Because they want to see the inflows and outflows based on the primary, and even in SAM, it's going to ask you what your primary NAICS is. That doesn't mean you can't do other things, but what is the bread and butter? What is the primary way in which you make money as a business? So you also have your PSC codes or your FSC codes. These are just different classification systems. They serve a very similar role, but we'll talk about how to use them differently. But the big driver here is your NAICS information, your NAICS code. Once you have your NAICS code, we talked about the banking account information that is also required. And you need points of contact. So you can have some basic business information. So we got tax ID, I got a NAICS code, I got some basic business information. What do I mean when I say basic business information? Address, phone number, points of contact for various people in the business. And it's okay if you're serving multiple roles as a POC for your business. When most businesses start, sometimes we don't have the staff. And so when we don't have the staff, you may see a name repetitive through the system. Completely fine. You're going to need your bank routing information. This is your routing number and your account number. Routing number and account number. Those two pieces, as we know, creates the banking information for us to get paid. And you want to make sure that you annotate which one are sometimes your routing number is not the same as the ACH or your wiring information. So just make sure you put the right information in your profile. And then, of course, your points of contact, as we've already discussed. If you have these things, you have what you need. Now, let's kind of switch gears a little bit. Sam just recently went through a merger with the company, and I put this old slide up here because I wanted to provide some historical reference. Because if you're around folks like me who've been in the system for a while, we are called the name of the old system. The name of the old system for how to find opportunities. So we talked about how to register. Now we're going to just briefly talk about how do I find contracts. This is where the money is. It was an old system called FBO, which stood for Federal Business Opportunities. It was on another site by itself. But recently, FBO, the Federal Business Opportunities site, which is where all your contracts that the government is trying to award, this is where they all were housed. They combined with SAM. So the same site we showed a few screens back, where we talked about registration, on that same site now, under contract opportunities, which we'll show later, under contract opportunities is also how you find the contracts. That was not the case 5 years ago. There was a site for registration called sam.gov. Prior to that, it was called CCR. Giving you a little history, it was called CCR, the Central Contractor Registry. That's gone. It was replaced by SAM. So I'm giving you this because depending on who you're talking to, you may hear these different acronyms and you're like, I have no idea what they're talking about. CCR, Central Contract Registry, turned into SAM, the System for Award Management. I'm talking a decade ago. FBO, the Federal Business Opportunities site, has now transitioned into SAM as well. So sometimes I'll be in conversation, I'll be like FBO, and I'm like, oh, forgot. It is SAM. But FBO is the Federal Business Opportunities.gov was the site. That site is no longer in existence. It is now located in SAM. But when you've been talking to people who've been in the space for a while, sometimes we'll mess up accidentally and call the name of the old system. But now this is called SAM as well. I'm just providing some historical context because I don't want you to be out here and someone throws an acronym you haven't heard of. Now, why is the NAICS important? So on your screen, you see an opportunity. This is actually a request for information. Now, I've highlighted a few things on the screen for your viewing. Now, when you look at general information, you see contract type. It's called a sources sought. Sources sought is when the government's trying to look for information. This does not necessarily turn into a contracting event. This could be the government trying to find information. You're going to also have some classifications, and you're going to have a description. In the classification section, you're going to see a NAICS code. Remember, we talked about NAICS with the registration process. The NAICS code is one way, not the only way, but it is one way for you to identify the opportunities that your company may be interested in pursuing as a prime or as a sub. And I said both because every opportunity, none of us as companies can chase every opportunity out there. Some things we may want to pursue directly as a prime. We want to go through the proposal process. The proposal process is the way we raise our hand and tell the federal government that we have a solution to their problem. And it's typically a documentation process. It's a way of us responding in writing to say, here is my approach to solving your problem. We call that may be called a technical volume. Here is my pricing to solve your problem. And I may even have to give them some business information to make them comfortable about who I am. Now, we're going to spend a lot more time talking about this, but that's just a prime. A sub, because every business, typically these contracts are so large in some instances that you may need help, or the prime may need help if you're not the prime. And so there's an opportunity for you to also participate as a sub. Now, one of the things that we're going to talk about in the series is how to let the potential primes know that you're interested. And I'm going to just go on a rabbit trail just for a quick second. And I think this is the thing that separates this particular course from some of the other courses that you may have encountered. I believe in the long game and the short game. Now, that's a golfing analogy. And I understand everyone doesn't play golf, and I don't play often anymore. Played a good bit in college, but that's a conversation for a different day. Never professionally or for a team, just recreationally. But in golf, they have with it when you see those guys, we call it teeing off. They're in what they call the tee boxes. And then there's a pin typically several hundred yards away. And typically the golfer doesn't have the human ability. I don't care if they're Tiger Woods or Jack Nicholson or whoever your favorite, Larry Els, whoever your favorite golfer may have been, past, present, or future. There's not human capacity, but in very rare instances, maybe a par three, where one stroke is getting them to what we call the green. Or, the green, which is where they're putting. The goal is to take the least amount of strokes or swings at the ball to land the ball into the hole. I'm being overly simplistic on purpose. And as a golfer, you have to develop the long game, meaning how do I get the ball in the fewest amount of strokes from the tee box down the fairway. Fairway is that green area. You're not close to the hole where you're trying to putt, but how do I get the ball closest to the pin in the fewest amount of strokes? Well, that long area they spend most of the time is called a fairway. From the tee box to the putting green, which when you see the guys putting, and I hope this analogy is not going over anyone's head, that long area is called the fairway. Now we're going to call that the long game because I'm a long way typically from where I want to be. Okay. As I get closer to the putting area, or they call it a green, and of course avoiding any land traps and sand dunes along the way, that typically are located on the fairway, the long green stretch. That's my long game. As I get closer to the pin, the same clubs that I used to get the ball furthest down the fairway, I now switch my clubs that have less range. Okay? So with my long game, I'm using clubs that's going to help me travel the most amount of distance and hopefully a straight line or in the direction I want to be in. And then in my short game, I'm still using clubs, but these clubs are a little more accurate. They have less range, and it's designed to get me into the cup as efficiently as possible. So in golf, in order to be a great golfer, you have to develop your long game and your short game. So in our analogy, the long game is proposals. I found an opportunity on FedBiz Ops, and I'm going to go through the process of understanding who the customer is, what they need, how they need it, what is the time frame, what pricing has historically worked for this opportunity. Excuse me. What pricing has historically worked for this opportunity, and how am I going to deliver this in a manner that's better than my peers? Long game. Short game, someone has already won the contract, or someone else is spending their money and their time and their resources to understand how to best position their firm, and I'm going to come alongside and support. Short game. So we have to learn how to develop the long game, finding an opportunity, positioning and posturing our organizations, and ultimately securing the work. Long game. I'm at the tee box all the way to I'm putting on the green to hopefully win this round or this hole of golf. That's what they call each hole. So I'm trying to win here. Okay. Long game. Short game. The contract's already won, and I want to provide support. Short game. I've eliminated all of that other work. So, as effective government contractors, we have to do the long game and the short game. Bidding and proposing, long game. Finding it on FedBiz Ops. Making sure it's something that our company has the ability to deliver. Have we done this before? The federal government calls that past performance. Do I have past performance? Can I put together a pricing package that makes sense for the firm so we can make money, as well as for the organization? Long game. Short game, someone has maybe won the contract already, possibly. And I'm going to come alongside and help with some of the pain points. He who solves problems gets paid. So, as a government contractor, your job, your role is to solve problems. Problems in a way that it provides value to the customer, whether that's the government directly, or whether your customer is a prime contractor who has a direct relationship with the federal government. Our job is to provide value. Now, we don't get as companies the right to determine the value we provide. Our customers determine if our products or services are valuable. Okay? Just like you do when you go to the grocery store. Okay. Now, this is kind of talking about why the next is important. Now, the next thing we want to talk about, and I'm just going to highlight a couple tools here. Another system is called FedBid. So we talked about FBO, FedBiz Ops, turn it into SAM.gov under the contract opportunities. Another system is called FedBid. Now, it was bought by Unison. This is a reverse auction site. These are typically RFQs. An RFQ is a request for quote. They typically are looking for a price. Now, there are some RFPs on here as well. RFP is a request for proposal. RFQ is request for quote. And I talked about a source to sought earlier, which is a market intelligence tool that the federal government uses. So here are RFQs, and it's a reverse auction system. So for those who remember systems like eBay, FedBid, now called Unison. Again, I always go back to those old names as I've been doing this for a while. So somehow call the new system the old name. But FedBid is now Unison. Now, Unison is a reverse auction site. So, like, if you are familiar with eBay, eBay was a tool, which eBay is still around. You could go out and say you had, like my daughter played the cello several years ago. And when she no longer wanted to play the cello anymore, I tried to sell her cello to a music store. The music store had too many cellos. So they didn't buy my daughter's cello. Well, I used the tool like eBay, to put her cello online. And the highest bidder was actually able to purchase the cello. The government does the opposite with FedBid, whereas consumers, we're looking for the highest price. The federal government is looking for the lowest price. So they call it a reverse auction. So, my cello example, say I got a bid, I'm fictitious, I got a bid for 200, 300, 400, and $1,000. As the seller, I want the highest price. So, Mr. $1,000 payer sold. The federal government takes our tax dollars and provides a bunch of social services, provides some discretionary contract dollars, and all these other things that our government does. Now, in this course, we're focusing on federal, okay? But I need you to understand that there's a lot of overlap, whether we're talking state and local. But I prefer federal, and that's what we'll be focused on in this class. But I do need you to know that you can still be considered a government contractor even at the state and local level. I have to say that. There's some different tools and techniques and a lot more, my opinion, nuance. But if you figure this out, the federal space, you will have the option to go into the state and local space. But there's going to be quite a lot of differences from locality and from state, which is one. Let me park here for a second. That's one of the reasons why I really like federal contracting. It's because it's pretty standard across the board. We have something called a FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation. It governs how federal contracting is administered. So if I'm on a federal contract, regardless of the state, there's a certain rules of engagement. Now, there are a couple exceptions, like Department of Defense. I talked about that military budget earlier. In Department of Defense, they have the DFAR, which is the DoD's Federal Acquisition Regulation. They took the FAR and they tailored, modified some provisions and made it applicable for Department of Defense. So if I'm doing work for one of the agencies I used to work for, they've now changed their name, was the Space and Naval Warfare Systems Center. And they were the engineering arm for the Navy. So that military budget we saw earlier in previous conversations. So under the DFAR, SPAWAR, the engineering arm for the Navy, used the DFAR to outline contracting provisions, okay? But it was based on the FAR. Certain agencies may tailor, adapt certain things because of nuances in that agency. But for the most part, the players, the rules of engagement are the same in all 50 states and OCONUS locations that the federal government may be operating. Like if you go to Ramstein Air Force Base, how they do contracting, even though it's in Germany, how they do contracting is going to be pretty consistent with what happens in the US because it's a federal contract, okay? That's one of the things that I really enjoy about federal contracting. State and local, the municipality A, municipality B are going to have slightly different rules of engagement. State A and state B are going to have so every time you go to a different locality, municipality, or state, the rules of engagement changes. So I do like the standardization of federal, which is why in this course, we're focusing on federal. Okay. Now, we've talked about the Unison. Now, in Unison, these acquisitions are typically over 25,000. Now, in some of the things we're going to discuss later, the federal government has to report acquisitions over 25K. Acquisitions under 25K, based on the FAR, that document I just talked about, it's a huge, looks like a Bible, and we call it the Federal Acquisitions Bible. Anything under 25,000 doesn't have to be reported. But on your screen, you see the Unison Marketplace. And just like any other uh, auction site, you see a countdown, just like if you would I'll go back to eBay. If you went to eBay, you'll see when the auction is going to expire. You're going to see identification numbers. You're going to have a category, like this is category 70, which is information technology. I just happen to know that because I've been doing this for a while. You're going to have a subcategory. You got your NAICS codes. You got set aside requirements, like this is a small business set aside. You got a end date, end time, and at the bottom you're going to see some additional provisions about how you put in your price, or they may want a small write up. All those informations are going to be in there, and then of course you have a buy number, which is at the top, kind of under the dashboard, but but above the buy countdown. Like this is a view details for buy number 1005838. By the time you look at this, it's probably going to be expired, but you get an idea. This is another way. So we talked about FBO. Excuse me. We talked about SAM. See, I did it again. We talked about SAM, which what replaced FBO, Fed Biz Ops, and now we have Fed Bid. So there are a couple different ways for you to find opportunities. So just want to make sure you're aware. Now, back to the NAICS code. The NAICS code, this is a website. So it never fails. I get new companies who come to me and say, I can't find my NAICS codes. There are a couple sites I like. This one is by the NAICS Association. It's www.naics.com. And they have a lookup site. And if you look at the top, you see find your NAICS code. So you got home, data enrichment, business list, market research, products, company lookup. Find your NAICS code. You can put in keywords, and the keywords will map to a NAICS code. Now, these NAICS code searches are very broad. Now, this system was invented quite a while ago. Probably needs to be updated, but you'll see a lot of overlap, especially when we get into the market intelligence sections of this conversation that we're going to have. You'll see you'll see what I'm talking about. But this is your NAICS code lookup. So if you're still in your SAM registration process, and I talked about those things you need. One of the things you're going to need is going to be your NAICS codes, and this is one of the ways of finding your NAICS code. So this is going to be a valuable resource. It's not the only one. There's a few others, but this is one that I find to be pretty effective. So when we look at our registration definitions, regardless of who you're doing business with, again, in this course, we focus on federal, but I want to throw these different things out here just so you're aware. We got the NAICS code, which we've talked about. I showed you the screen, a previous screen. You saw the NAICS website. You also have a standard industrial classification system. These are just different ways of expressing, similar values. So you got the SIC, the standard industrial classification systems. You have the NIGP. You'll see these a lot in some states. Like I know for a fact that the state or the nation state, the region of DC uses an NIGP code. That's the National Institute of Governmental Purchasing. You'll see this typically at the state level. You got FSCs, the Federal Supply Classification Systems. You got PSCs, which is one that I like, and you'll see why later when we talk about market intelligence. The product service codes. Then, of course, we need our tax identification numbers. Or I don't recommend this. If you're going to start a company as a sole proprietor, you can use your SSN or your personal social security number. I repeat, I do not recommend this because we want the entity or the asset protection that comes from having a unique tax ID number. And then, of course, we have our DUNS number. So these are some of just common registration definitions that you're going to just be aware of. But for the sake of our conversation, we're focusing on the NAICS codes, but recognize that we do have something called the SIC or the SIC, the NIGP, the FSC, PSC, and then, of course, there's the site for the DUNS, which is the Data Universal Numbering System. through Duns and Bradstreet, which kind of operates a little bit like a credit monitoring system. That's an oversimplification, but it is required for what we're going to do now. One of the things I want to get ready to show you now is the government supply product priorities. So we got agency inventories. Um, we got access from other agencies. You got your federal prison industries. You got the blind and severely handicapped. Now, your disability services. Uh, these are the contracts where the workforce has severe handicaps. The federal government, being what it is, wants to make sure that we take care of our people. And so they provide employment opportunities to folks with severe handicaps. And one of the contracts that does this is the Ability One. Ability One is a provision that you'll see these contracts going to agencies like Goodwill, who employs individuals who are mentally acute, but may have some severe handicaps that may prevent them from um, carving out a nice livelihood. So Ability One serves a need in that. This was previously called JWOOD or JWOD. You also have your GSA or your DLA. GSA is the General Service Administration, and DLA is the Defense Logistics Agency. They have stock inventory, and you also got some GSA optional schedules, and you got other commercial sources. So these are just when the government is looking at buying product, these are the hierarchy of where they look. So when they're buying product, before this thing goes out on Unison or FedBid, talking about the same system, or you see it on sam.gov, before they go and procure these services, this is where they look first. They look to see agency inventory. So, when agencies get rid of inventory, uh, they have a process where other agencies can go and get that excess inventory. They look there first. They look at excess from other agencies. They look at the federal prison industries. Then they look at their blind and severely handicapped. So these are the areas they check before they say, okay, we need to actually buy this product. So these are the product priorities. So before it comes out on the street, that's what we call it, before the opportunity is let, before an acquisition is pursued by the government for product, and I'm talking product, not services, cell phones, a refrigerator, all kind of things that the government needs from an inventory perspective. They go and they check this list first before they put it on sam.gov or Unison. So let's transition. Now, this is a size standard table, and I want to make sure we distill this. So not only does the NAICS code tell you the industry description, like for example, currently on your screen is a NAICS code 541310. Those are architectural services. The size standard is $7.5 million. Okay. That means that the rules change, it used to be a 3-year average, now it's 5. So if you're in a 5-year period, if your company has made less than 7.5 million on average, you're considered a small business if you're providing architectural services. Now, I have a lot of computer companies. So I'm gonna look at another one. 541511. That is custom computer programming services. Based on the screen, that's $27.5 million in revenue. Now, remember, this is over a 5-year period. So think about a running average. In a 5-year rolling average, so right now we are in calendar year, as of this recording, 2022. Okay. So 22, 21, 20, 19, 18. That's 5 years. 18 to 19, 19 to 20, 20, 21, 21, 22, and then let's just act like this year's over. Okay. Good. 5-year average. Over a 5-year average, if your revenue for 541, 511, or 541, 512, these are my NAICS codes, 541, 519, it's $27.5 million. That's a 5-year average. If your 5-year rolling average, because next year, of course, you're going to look back at the 5 years previous, is less than $27.5 million, your company is considered small. That's why these NAICS codes are important. Now, let's just say my primary NAICS code is 541, 511. And let's use a fictitious example. And let's say your revenue is $20 million. You're small in custom computer programming services. But if there is a contract that comes up for architectural services, and in that solicitation, they're using NAICS code 541310, it's the top line, I don't want to lose you, and the size standard is 7.5 million, and your revenue over the last 5 years is an average of $20 million, you cannot, I want to repeat, you cannot compete in an architectural services opportunity using NAICS code 541310 and compete as a small business. So you're small in custom computer services, but you have too much revenue to be considered small in architectural services. So for that NAICS code, you would not be able to compete as a small business. You would be considered large. Let's look at another example. Different example. You're a $10 million company. Your primary NAICS code, we're going to use the same one, 541, 511, custom computer programming service. Size standard based on this chart is 27.5. Now I need you to understand that these NAICS codes are reevaluated and the size standards are modified from time to time. But I'm going to make sure that you have access to the latest and greatest. So you always want to make sure you have the latest and greatest size standard table so you can know if you're accurately competing as a small or large. Because contracts can be overturned if your revenue exceeds the size standard, whether you knew it or not. You made an accident, you bid on a piece of work, found out that the size standard was smaller than your 5-year projection or your 5-year run rate and revenue. If the person, say you win the contract, it can be protested if the person that you won and you competed as a small business, but yet your revenue exceeds the size standard, that contract can be taken from you if it's challenged. Okay? That's why this is important. So you went through all the work of talking to the customer, them getting to know you, understanding the requirement, writing a great proposal, and then you win the work, and then they find out, well, your competitors are going to know because there's a lot of money on the line in some instances for them. You're a $10 million company. You bid on the example we just used. You bid on an architectural services contract with the NAICS code specified with a size standard of 7.5 million. Your revenue has been 10 million over a 5-year average. It used to be 3 years. The government changed it, so now we're going to give you 5 years to come up with your size standard average. So now you're too large. It's going to be contested. And when it's contested, they're going to ask you for financial data. They're going to ask you a whole bunch of questions to determine. They're not just going to take their word, but they're going to ask you a whole bunch of questions, and you need to be honest and provide the information. If it's deemed that you were too large, the next person in line that would have won. So they're going to take it from you. And it doesn't mean that the person who's protesting you is going to win it. They're going to go back to the federal agency who made the decision and say, hey, they have been disqualified because they're too large based on this next code. Who's next in line? And whoever's next in line is going to win the work. And that person next in line may not be the same person who protested the decision. Now, some agencies, when they make award decisions, they will put out a ranking. And it depends on the agency and how they do it. They'll put out a ranking and tell you, here are the top 5. But this is the company who won. I've seen that. You don't always see it. It depends on the contracting officer. There's no rule that says they have to do it. Some agencies do it for transparency. But the important thing on the NAICS standard size is making sure that if you're competing as a small business, and we've seen on previous screens where they would say this is a small business set aside, or going back to the different social economic categories, this is an 8A award, or this is a SDVOSB. If you're competing and your company's not an 8A and you win, which I don't know how you would really win that, because the federal government has ways of checking your status before you bid. But the size standard, the size standard one is a little different because they don't know how big you are. They may not know. And you may have just passed the threshold recently, especially when we're talking about calendar year versus fiscal year. But the system has a way of keeping you honest. Okay? Now, we're jumping into our SAM. So again, I want to show you why the NAICS code is important. In this particular, this is in my SAM profile. There's a place for goods and services. And as you see, I have listed a bunch of NAICS codes. But there's one, 541990, which has a yes beside it. That is my primary NAICS. Now that NAICS 541990, you probably never heard of it. You're like, well, what is that? And it gives you a description. It says all other professional, scientific, and technical services. Now, I'm going to tell you something that many people won't tell you unless you just know someone who plays in this category. The intel work for a lot of the federal agencies. We do work for some of the 3-letter agencies. And some of our revenue can't be tracked because of the work we do and the customers we do it for. But when they award contracts, a lot of times the intelligence work, think about movies like Eagle Eye or Enemy of the State. Think about those movies. The work that we do like that shows up in this very obscure category, 541990. Okay? You have to know what your NAICS codes are. And the same rules apply. I can't compete as a small business and my revenue is over the target. At the bottom of that screen that you see on your screen was PSC codes. I'm not going to spend a lot of time there, but that's just another classification system. So you got NAICS codes and you got PSC codes. Now, for your registration purpose, the NAICS code is just fine. Just fine. Now, we talked about that NAICS.com website. What I like about that particular site in particular is I can put in keywords like here I put in computer. And all of the NAICS codes with computer in the title came up. And one of my NAICS codes was 541512. Just like I have 541511. I have 541519. So I can go and I can use a tool like NAICS.com and I can put in my keywords. So say you do graphics design, you could put in graphic design and any of the NAICS codes with graphic design will come up. You do home healthcare. You put in home healthcare in the NAICS search, hit short view, and all of the NAICS codes with home healthcare or somewhat related will pop up. Same thing with the SIC. We talked about the NIAICS code or the NAICS code. We talked about the SIC code. This particular site, allows you to give both. Now, for your registration, you don't need both. You can just do the NAICS codes at a minimum. Okay. But it's good to know what your PSC codes are, and we'll talk about them at a later time. But I really like the PSC codes, very similar to the NAICS codes, just how they're cataloged and how the systems use them and how they talk and how the government does reporting. It's the only real difference. But for SAM registration purposes, the NAICS codes are more than sufficient. But I put in computer and you can see my NAICS codes came up and a SIC code came up. SIC code is on the right. It shows 7373, Computer Integrated Systems Design, which is related to 541, 512, which is the NAICS code for computer system design. So you can see there's some kind of hierarchy or methodology in the mapping. Okay. So that was really what we wanted to show on this screen. And I have a lot of IT companies, so I pulled up an IT specific reference. Now, when I do the NAICS code lookup, I can also see in that same scratch, I can look up companies and it'll tell me the top companies in that space. So this is extremely important when you're a new company, you haven't been in the space long, and you're trying to figure out who you can potentially do business with. All these companies have listed that NAICS code somewhere. This information is pulled from a bunch of databases. But I put in 541, 512, and this might change because this is a dated search. But you got Tata Consultancy Services out of New York. You got DynCorp LLC. You got Cerner Corporation, which is actually a EHR or a health IT company. You got Accenture, which is one of the big four accounting firms. You got CACI. I call them khaki, but they prefer to be called CACI International. You got Sirius Computer Solutions. You got Accenture again, LLC, because they have the different business units, and sometimes the names are slightly different. You got Oak Hill Capital Partners. You got Presidio, and you got Capgemini North America. But this gave me a quick listing of who is providing these services based on the NAICS code. So you have a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of data, but the challenge sometimes is that entrepreneurs and executive managers in these entrepreneur executive managers, these government contracting firms, sometimes just need a little guidance on how to best use the data that's readily available in most cases. So this is really good. Now, we talked about the SIC code. Again, just wanted to show you how to find this information. I have never been asked a SIC code doing government contracting, but I wanted you to see, here's a website through Department of Labor, Standard Industrial Classification System, same process. I put in a keyword, I put in my keyword, and my keyword will actually derive an output. So I put the keyword in, and it will actually give me the results. Yep. So I put in computer systems. When I put in computer systems, you can see up came a couple different SIC codes: 7371, 7372, 7373. So if I read them, 7371 is computer programming services. Now, again, I just put in computer systems. So anything that was somewhat related came up. Then I put in I got 7372, which was prepackaged software, not a computer system, but related. And then 7373, which was computer integrated systems design. So pretty intuitive. Again, I've never been asked for a SIC code, but again, I focus primarily on federal. So if you're looking to do things in different agencies at maybe the state and local level, someone may ask you. So I wanted you to know at least how to find it if you needed it. But no one has ever asked me this. More drill down. So if you look at that 7373, because I can actually put in keyword like I did on the previous screen, or I can put in, if I know the SIC code, I can get a description. Very similar to what we saw on the next screen. Now, on the next screen, we didn't have a description, but you got an idea. Now, moving forward, we have the NIGP. This is the National Institute of Government Purchasing. Um, this is an NIGP code. This is state. Again, we got the NAICS codes, we got the NIS, the NAICS codes, the SIC codes, the PSC codes. One of the codes that state uses, again, we don't focus on state in this class, but again, I know I got people coming in from all over the place, and you may have heard of some of these before. We have the NIGP code, the National Institute of Government Purchasing. I know for a fact that Georgia uses the NIGP code. I know DC uses that code as well. So again, I want to give you the information to how to locate this information if you need it. But in federal, again, we do not use NIGP codes. Typically, it's NAICS, PSC codes historically. Another example where we're using NIGP codes with DC Office of Contracting and Procurement. And you see a very similar look and feel. You got your NIGP code. I'm looking on the screen on the right. You got your NIGP code, and you have a description of what that NIGP code is. Very similar to what we saw in NAICS codes, SIC codes, PSC codes. You get the idea. So that was the purpose of showing this, so that you can see the overlap. So there's a lot of similarity, but again, in this class, we focus on federal, but I wanted you to see applications of where this is used. Now, this is one of my favorites, the PSC code. The PSC code is the product supply code. And the tool that I use is psctool.us. I like this a lot. I like the PSC codes when it comes to identifying opportunities. Quite frankly, this search is a lot more narrow. As you get into this and you're looking for contract opportunities that have been awarded, and I'm going to show you some websites like USA Spending and others that you can use to find opportunities that exist at a later time. But I like using the PSC codes because they're more narrow. One of the challenges with the NICS code is it's very broad, and you'll see things kind of thrown in there that quite frankly are not related. But the NAICS system is an older system, and the category system is not as effective. The PSC code system use a category management system. So this is good. The NAICS code is all based on industry. So we saw earlier, we saw the FY 2019 budget, and we saw energy and military. Think of those as industries. Very loose, but think of them as industry. PSC codes are based on a category management system. So when you think about category management, think about IT, think about logistics, think about healthcare. I'm talking about categories. Category management is how retail stores are organized. There's typically a category manager who's responsible for a specific category items. So the PSC system is more like a category management system. It's more narrow. When you go down the aisle and you're looking for socks in Target, in that area, there's a whole bunch of different socks. Whereas if I look at it from a NISCS perspective, they look at it as an industry. They just look at retail. But in the retail stores, a whole bunch of stuff. So in order to be more narrow, I can look at the category management system to narrow my findings. So industry, think about Target, retail. I got Target, I got Walmart, I got a bunch of stuff. The PSC system is more narrow. So like under this particular one, I got under IT, spend categories. I got IT software, narrow. I got IT hardware. I got IT consulting. I got IT security, IT. See how narrow that is? But if you think back to our NAICS codes, we had things like computer uh, systems design. Very broad. It's a lot of stuff. But here, I'm being more specific. I got IT software. I got IT hardware. I got consulting, security, outsourcing. I got telecom. A lot more narrow. And if I look at this IT consulting one specifically, I can also see, it may be hard to see on the screen, but I also have ADP systems analysis. I got some other similar categories. But you got a CMS spend category. It gives me a portfolio, and it gives me an object class code. Now, when you spend more time with this, it's going to make sense. And it even will suggest you NAICS codes. But just to kind of go down the path more, you got professional services, and I can open and expand those categories to get more, to do a deeper drill down into the category. So the takeaway from that slide, as we get ready to wrap up here, the takeaway from that slide was, with the PSC, I can be more specific with the drill down. I can get very narrow in my searches. This is very key when it comes to looking at opportunities. The NAICS codes are going to be more industry specific, very broad. It's going to be a lot of overlap. So category management, PSC codes, very narrow. NAICS codes, very broad, a lot of overlap. You'll see a lot of overlap when you're trying to be specific. So I like to use PSC codes when I'm looking for contracting opportunity, because it's less that I have to filter through. And that's good. Now, this is the point where we have questions. So in your portal, you have a area in the bottom where you can send me your questions that you may have about this particular module. So please, in this module, keep the questions to the things that we've discussed. And I'll also upload, as the questions come in, I'll upload answers to frequently asked questions. So definitely look at the library. And as you see, because there's a lot of questions that come in all the time, those will be addressed in there. But there's a unique question. Please send it to me, and I look forward to answering your question. There's my academic email. I'm finishing up my PhD, so I spend a lot of time in my academic email. So you're welcome to send me an email. I'll probably see it if you send it there first. But use the portal, and if I don't get back to you quick enough, which I respond pretty quickly, but for whatever reason, if I don't see it, because it's a lot of you guys, if you want to send it my immediate attention, send it to that email address, and I'll definitely get you a definite answer to your question. Thank you guys for tuning in to this module. I'll see you in the next one.